Cannon, a representative of the GW Alumni Association, before we start. Christine?
Thank you. My name is Christine Cannon. I'm an Alumni Association board member. I'm so delighted to be here today. I'm actually an alum of the Corcoran, and I think we have a lot to learn from this auditorium setup today. Really excited to be here and to engage you all and to let you know that we are a sponsor of the program tonight. We monitor a grant program for a lot of alumni events, and we encourage you all and your other various alumni affinity groups to continue looking to us for support. We encourage your involvement and hope to be a voice for you and also a place where you can voice your concerns to us. It's my delight to be here today and look forward to speaking with you later today. Thank you.
It's my turn. Hello to you all. Thank you to Yuri Horowitz, who helped organize this, and to the GW Tourism Alumni Network for putting this together. As you just heard, this is the big year for sustainable tourism in the United Nations. And we all know these figures by heart, but I just wanted to go over with you what an explosive industry travel and tourism has become. It's truly a 21st century industry. You're all too young to remember the depths of the Cold War, but before, the world was truly divided in two: places you could go and places you couldn't go because of the competing political ideological systems. That all changed in the 90s, and tourism has skyrocketed. In the depths of the Cold War, in say 75, around the world there were 250 million foreign trips. Once the Cold War ended and the whole world opened up, we had new technology, we had the internet, we had airplanes that could fly across the globe. Bingo. 2012 set the record for 1 billion trips. 250 million, 1 billion. That's what we're talking about. This is why this is an incredibly important subject, I hope, for you. And I hope you all remember that as millennials, you like to travel more than you like to buy things. So, the question of sustainability, that's one of those buzzwords that we always like to unpack and figure out what we're really talking about. In tourism, we often forget to ask, what are we trying to sustain? And that's what these speakers are going to help us understand. I will introduce them as they come in, but first Elliot Ferguson from DC will talk about the marketing and how he is sustaining a particular culture of our wonderful city. Megan will talk about the basic sustainability of 2 places in Greece, 2 islands, sustaining in a basic services way. When you invite a bunch of people to your country, do you have enough water? Do you have enough energy? And she's going to talk to you about that. Those are important questions. Maybe a little tedious to some people, but without answering those questions, you're in trouble. And finally, Don, who has the most experience of, I think, of all of them, is planes, trains, hotels. He's going to talk about his experiences in at least 3 different cities across this country, and how he picked certain aspects to develop, nurture, sustain, and then push tourism. Now, when I first talked about this panel with Yuri, we were talking about opening up with a little discussion of what good governance means in 2 different examples. And I usually do Bordeaux, France, and Venice, Italy as the 2 examples. But since then, a whole different issue has come up about sustainable tourism here in the United States, and that's the basic issue of sustainability, and that's the freedom to travel. I'm just back from Victoria, Canada, where I was peppered with questions about what is the new Trump administration doing with travel? Has this gotten into any of your lives? Never. Well, in Canada, our northern neighbor, we don't hear about them so much, but they were reeling from these different policies, and they asked me questions about, it seems to them border policy is arbitrary. Somebody knew somebody who had been rejected even though they had the right passport, the right visa, that intrusive patting downs, different questions about what is the real border policy. They knew the immigration ban was in limbo, but they still wondered, okay, those are 7 countries, but if you're confused at being a Muslim, it seems like you could be thrown away too. So they all had their anecdotes, and they all knew that the Toronto school system, the biggest in Canada, had just made a policy no more school trips to the United States. It was just too much. They said, we don't want to put our students in the position of traveling down to the border with their friends and classmates and being told that some of them couldn't enter the United States. That's the kind of issues they have. Travel agents in Canada told me they're rebooking their clients to not have to make changes and connections in the United States because they have too many who had been not allowed to get on the next leg. The CEO of their tourism bureau, their destination management group, said that to them they call it the thickening of the border. And you know, in the travel industry, this is part of the jargon, you want a thin border. You want a border that brings people together, that allows a cultural transfer, and now they feel it's thickening, that it's harder and harder. And I think for them, the big moment was the United Airlines incident, what I know you all know about, the doctor who was physically removed from the airplane. It was a very Canadian view of it. We saw it as this airline was making trouble, Chicago overreacted, so on and so forth. They saw it as one more example of too much policing and not enough protection in the travel industry in the United States. And it was taken so seriously that their Minister of Transport put out a special statement and wrote to every airlines that does business in Canada, every airline, and said to them that, and here it is right here, I'm sure that a letter to all the airlines saying no more forcible, they would never allow forcibly removing passengers from any airplane, overbooked or not, and he said, quotes, I'm sure that you were as disturbed as I was and as all Canadians were over this appalling incident. He also noted that his American equivalent, the Secretary of Transport, was silent on the issue. And I had to answer all the questions. To the point that when the CEO of the Victoria City Council told me she was getting letters emails from American citizens asking if she could tell them whether or not they would be allowed back into their own country. And I said, whoa, I can't do that. So I'm bringing this up because, among other things, these wonderful professionals can do all their great work preparing for their conventions, making their areas attractive, be it a city, a rural area, an island, but something will always come up. And this is the whammy right now, this basic question, how can you sustain travel and tourism if you can't travel? So with that wonderful upbeat note, I'm turning to Elliot. That's sort of the elephant in the room. Elliot is, if you've been in the DC airports recently, you've seen his wonderful work, DC Pool, right? He's like, gosh, a young person is actually young, maybe, but 27-year veteran. We discovered he has a Washington State connection like I do, born in Spokane, raised in
lots of places.
And graduate of Vice President of Atlanta Convention of Bureaus. He's been in Savannah, gorgeous places. You have a very nice resume. And is now in charge of us, Destination DC. And he's going to tell us how he figured out DC Pool, how it represents our culture, et cetera, et cetera.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Linda. Elizabeth, sorry. Thinking about Linda that works for my team in the back room there, because when I take credit for anything that we do, it's the marketing team, everyone else that does all the work, and I'm up here saying it's us. But happy to be here. One thing about United Airlines, I heard a comedian say recently that everyone's saying, I'm not going to fly United. After this, it's appalling. We're never going to fly United. And then he said, well, until they give us a discount rate, then we'll just go ahead and fly 6 months later. And that's kind of the reality of situations like that. It is appalling. It's kind of deafening that things like that happen, especially when when you think about what we're doing, we're focusing on promoting a destination, come for fun, come for learning, come for all the wonderful things, and we spend so much time on governance and things in which we have to focus on a regular basis. So Destination DC, we are a DMO, Destination Management Organization, focusing on, technically not the people that live in Washington, but people in which we're trying to attract to Washington domestically and internationally. So that's conventions and tourism. And as we are talking to our stakeholders, and I spent time today in the Wilson Building in Washington, which is our City Hall. You're sitting across from elected officials and they're somewhat listening to you and you're like, well, don't people just automatically want to come to Washington? And you just kind of take a deep breath and understand you have a lot of work to do in terms of getting them to understand the importance of what we do. Advertising plays a huge role in how we promote our destination. I think there's a slide show that some slides that may or may not. There you go. If I have this in my head, right? There we go. Green button. All right.
Can you see that?
All right. There's the. I love Greece. It's beautiful.
Glad you do. I'm afraid that maybe they didn't load this.
All right.
Because I came to check.
Okay. Well, our organization, always good to have a backup. We focus on a lot of things in terms of promoting our destination, including making sure that our stakeholders understand the politics of what we're trying to accomplish, and sometimes how those politics play a negative role in promoting our destination as a whole. As you can imagine, there are certain perceptions of Washington, D.C. That people that live in Washington don't get because most of them have been here all their lives and they know how great this destination is. But just imagine this. We're in China, which we're there a lot. There are 200 million people that travel out of China every year. Only 2 million come to the United States. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to get a larger percentage of that population to Washington. So I'm in a room with 50 people that are responsible for promoting our travel and tourism professionals that are responsible for putting together packages. The largest organization in China that is responsible for tourism is called Citra. They've got over 32,000 employees that are solely focusing on developing packages in terms of travel to the U.S. I asked them, you ever been to the United States? Most of them, if they raise their hand, where have you been? New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Orlando. What's your perception of Washington as a debt? Well, the next question, have you ever been to Washington? No. Then what's your perception of Washington? And for those of you who are in the audience that may have grown up in China coming to the U.S. for the first time, there's an assumption that there are 10 to 20 million people that live here. Every building is 30 to 40 stories tall, and the list goes on and on. And they don't understand all the things that we have to offer as a destination, and I call it because of the BBC or CNN effect. Because every single day they're watching the news, and every single day if they're talking about America, there's someone talking about politics, and they end by saying what word? Washington. And so that's their perception of Washington. They're coming to this dull, boring town with one museum called the Smithsonian, not 16, with tons of people living on top of each other. There's nothing green about our city. That perception is all over the place. And sometimes it's even just in the other part of America. So our goal is to continue to focus on Washington and all the other things in which we have to offer as a destination. So the marketing team, I always challenge the marketing team, how are we going to do this? How are we going to promote our destination and get people to think differently about Washington as a destination? How are we going to get them to come for what I call the 3 M's, monuments, memorials, and museums, things that we love about our destination, but that doesn't always resonate as a sexy thing or sex, that's the sex appeal is not necessarily coming to a destination and going to a museum. Though once you're here, and clearly once you go to each of the museums, you're noticing how uniquely different they are and you enjoy your visit. So what we thought about is what would resonate from a global perspective as well as a local perspective, because I don't want to go and meet with the mayor and her tell me that she hates our campaign. And I say to her, it's not for you, it's for those people that are coming to Washington, D.C., but I want everyone to love it. We all want people to like us. And doggone it, I want our elected officials to like us as well. So we get groups that come in, we get journalists that are coming into the city on a regular basis, and the team automatically says to me, first day, we want you to come and welcome them. And I'm like, I don't want to welcome them once they're here. They're tired, they've been on a plane for 15 hours in some cases. And I want them to go out and bike the sites and spend time in the city, see how green Washington is, and do all the fun things in which we promote on a regular basis. And a lot of drinking and a lot of fun. And I want to meet them on the third day, after they've been doing all these great things, and they're asking me, why should we promote Washington as a destination in our country? And I say, well, tell me what you think. What did you see about Washington that was different than perhaps the perception that you had? And they automatically say, DC is very cool. And that's the word that we love, because that's exactly what we feel about our destination. But the goal for us is, how do we get the global community to recognize us outside of their perceptions? How do the global community, domestic community that want to go to New York City, because New York is great, and want to come to DC for a half of a day trip before they go to Florida for all the fun, how do we get them to come and stay much longer in Washington, D.C. and make us a part of that destination, versus coming here and saying, oh my God, this is great, I wish we'd stayed longer, and then they're gone, and the economic impact is not there. DC Cool gives us that chance through promoting our neighborhoods, promoting sporting events, nightlife, outdoor activities, the food scene here, shopping, which is getting better, and all those things that resonate in other destinations that don't resonate with Washington as a destination. And that's why we love the DC Cool campaign, because people get it, and that's what we hear the most about our destination on a regular basis. And I think the thing that really hit home for us is, after we came up with the DC Cool campaign, which, by the way, we mirrored it after the America Cool campaign exhibit at the National Portrait Gallery, remember that? America Cool, DC Cool, it just kind of resonated, this flowed well. And guess what happened after that? Forbes magazine chooses Washington, D.C. as the coolest city in America. Drop the mic moment. I had nothing to do with it, and that's what made it even better, because one, you don't think of Forbes and travel. So you would think travel and leisure, or someone that's specific in the industry. But suddenly, they're saying we're America's coolest city. And then after that, Lonely Planet, which globally has a presence, especially digitally, named Washington as the top city that you should ever travel to in the world, not just in America. And the accolades kept coming. The fittest city, which is why Don moved here, because he's in such great shape, and he wanted to showcase his muscles and all the different things. And we were able to really focus on the things that resonate with a community that perhaps, with other people saying positive things about Washington. And then last year, the Michelin guy. What better way to say that you've got a great restaurant scene than Michelin coming in and validating the food scene, when there are only there's 3 other cities at that point that had Michelin guides. So I no longer have to say, I promise you, the restaurants in Washington are great, you're going to love them, because Michelin is now saying that for us. And that resonated in a positive way with the American Cool campaign. So we continue to focus on ways in which we can promote our destination quite differently than other cities do, because we have to, even though we're a first-tier major city. And then the second component of that is that, what better way to get the global community and domestic community to think differently about Washington if someone other than the guy that's paid to say great things about Washington is showcasing our destination differently. So the team came up with the hashtag MyDCCool. So for those of you who are on Twitter and all those other variables where you're sending pictures and communicating, hashtag MyDCCool was an opportunity for visitors to Washington to take pictures of their experiences in Washington, D.C., and then send those pictures to us. And then we started populating those pictures on our website, which then became the most popular section of our website, because it's not just us saying how cool we are, which is never cool to say you're cool, but it's others coming to a destination and taking great pictures. And I'm not talking about just the pictures of the monuments and the cherry blossoms, which are great, but we're talking about pictures of architecture and other parts of the city that really resonated. And so now we're getting a lot of press and positive feedback in terms of what's happening there. So next thing for us, in less than 31 days, we're going to be hosting a major event called U.S. Travel Association's annual convention, called IPW, which I always want to say it stands for something, and my communications team says never tell folks what that stood for. It used to stand for International Powwow. So I'll tell my communications folks that I told you that. But IPW is coming to Washington, D.C. 6,500 individuals coming to our city from all over the world, 500 journalists. The best opportunity for us to showcase all the things in which we love about Washington as a destination. And Don hosted IPW when he was in Chicago a few years ago. And the reason why we're hosting it, it ties back to how I started this topic, which is that we're an economic development organization. And so after hosting IPW, a city normally experiences about 1 million plus international visitors to that destination, and the economic impact continues to grow exponentially afterwards. So Chicago and Washington have we suffer some of the same perception problems from a global perspective. Everyone knows Chicago, where Don was. Everyone knows Washington, D.C. But Washington, D.C. is the number 7 place that international visitors go to when they come to the U.S. Go to our website, you'll see the others. But it's usually Las Vegas and New York and Honolulu and Orlando and all those others, and we're number 7. We want more market share. And we know we're going to get more market share by being able to showcase Washington differently the first week of June to this global community that's coming in. And the economic impact for us is great, not only from an international perspective, but also a domestic perspective. So we're really excited about all the things in which we're going to be doing on the National Mall, at NAC Stadium, events and activities around the city, taking the journalists to the museum for a great lunch. Our mayor, who was a tour guide as a student, is actually going to get on a double-decker bus and lead a group of journalists and keep tour operators as a tour guide of Washington, D.C. So she's going to go back to what she did years ago and showcase Washington, which is going to really wow these folks because they love being supported by the elected officials in our city. So that gives you a little bit of a snapshot about who we are as an organization and some of the things in which we focus on in terms of promoting Washington as a destination.
Thank you, Elliot. Now you just, the charmer, he's a promoter. This is in some ways the glamour of the industry. Poor Megan. Megan has the wonderful but less glamorous job of, and she's been doing it for several decades. She's a pioneer in going to a place and saying, as Elliot just said, this is economic development, whether your government recognizes or not. Tourism, as we just said, is one of the major industries in the world. It is the biggest employer in the world. It's the top 10 industries. It's economic development. And in countries where Megan has been, it's either extractive industry or tourism are the big choices for development. So this is a big responsibility. So before we get to the stage where you can have Elliot promote you, you have Megan come and do the groundwork. And she, of the 20-odd countries she's helped, and as it says in the program, she now has a program at Harvard, she has another one at Cornell, and she's going to talk to us, she's picked 2 islands in Greece to give us a sense of the kind of really wonderful, deep, hard work you have to do over the years to make that basic foundation. So Elliot can then promote you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you all. Thank you to the Alumni Association for inviting me. And I have been looking forward to coming to Washington. I've been involved with the GW program since they first launched ecotourism as a part of their curriculum. And I got back into teaching only 7 years ago when I started teaching at Harvard Extension. And that was a wonderful opportunity to start to dig more deeply into what it takes to make a destination sustainable, especially with these statistics. We are seeing, of course, now 4% growth annually, and that's average around the world, and still that's double the global GDP. Over 1 billion tourists, as Elizabeth mentioned, and it's up to almost 1.2 now. And we are seeing something that's very much a part of that growth, which is the use of resources at the destination. Some terrific academics have looked at that, and in the next 20 to 30 years, we expect resources at destinations to become more and more in peril because tourism uses those resources at a very high rate. compared to local people. So that's what I decided to explore when I wrote my book. Here we go. Is how do we measure the impacts on resources and destinations? And very surprisingly, outside of these international projections, I found very few studies, and we continue to work on this to try and find every study on the amount of water that's being used in specific destinations, the type of energy use that's being fostered by tourism. And ultimately, I found that my students were doing very, very good work on this through my own class. And that was partly because they lived all over the world because it's an online program. And so I had students from places like Fortaleza, Brazil, and Macau, China, and all over Latin America, parts of Colombia, Mexico. And what they started reporting back to me and to read these papers was very, very eye-opening, was that the amount of water, for example, was disappearing in destination after destination, and yet the use of water by tourists was skyrocketing. So this obviously was a kind of a flare in the sky, something that was understood at an international level, but wasn't really being discussed at the local level where they can take some control of the situation. And that's where governance and leadership really comes in, because obviously local officials really need to be aware of this, right? And they need to have some measurements about what's happening. And as I was working with my various consultancies, and I was in the Galapagos Islands of all places, for example, meeting with the very prestigious Darwin Foundation, and they were complaining about the heavy use of water on Santa Cruz Island. And I said, have you been measuring the amount of water in your watershed? Do you actually know how much water is left in your watershed? This is the Darwin Foundation. They said, no, we haven't because we're working on the reserve, not the actual land-based area where the tourists are. So this is what I began to find. This is that, in fact, through my student work and my own visits to country after country, that actually no one was measuring this. So we began to look at it just from the student perspective, and I had this student, Sofia Fotiadou, who's from Greece, and she was able to use Greek documents in order to look at the utilities. And what she found was that water consumption was up 300% in the high season on the beautiful island of Santorini. I'm sure many of you know that island. It's such a beautiful island. It so happens my husband and I took our honeymoon there. The desalination and wastewater treatment plants were being oversized as a result of this heavy use in the high season. And part of the reason for that is, of course, is that tourists go to destinations in the dry season. So that actually amplifies the impacts on water resources. And of course, the Greek islands are not wet places. They're dry already. What she also found was that no measurements were being taken locally to account for local water use. And surprisingly, local authorities were not implementing any efficiency measures. So what they were doing instead was building more and more infrastructure to meet the need. And they were also sending water tankers over during the high season. So ultimately what you were seeing here was tourism driving some really bad decision making about how to use local resources. So then she took another class with me. And then she did Roads Greece. And that was more documentation that she found from the Greek government, this time on energy use on the island of Rhodes, where you can see that their local population is a very small percentage of the number of visitors that are going there. And you can also see their off-season energy use, which would be the local residents. And then you can see the high-season energy use. So what she learned was that the power generation, again, was being built to actually meet the tourism demand, because you have to, as a local government, you don't want blackouts, right? So you have to have the infrastructure there for peak use. And that's what she found. So what she surprisingly found was that the additional cost for that peak infrastructure was not being paid for by the tourism industry. So what happened in Rhodes, Greece? They built a brand new oil-fired power plant to cover the tourism costs with a 20-year lock-in on their greenhouse gas emissions, which of course actually is something that now with the post-Paris Agreement might be something that they would really want to avoid. It was protested by Greenpeace, which is why I have the photo there. It's a Greenpeace photo. But even more amazingly, this was all paid for by the Greek citizens. So what she actually found was that each Greek citizen was paying $1.50 per tourist just to support the energy infrastructure on roads. So these are things that we started to realize we weren't sure that any destination authorities were thinking about. And it did lead to a question of what are we going to do when climate risks get worse? And so we've started to track this at Harvard. We're working hard on keeping this data together. We've created this International Sustainable Tourism Initiative to look at how to manage at the local authority level climate change challenges, for example. For example, Bali, Indonesia, 60% of their watersheds are now reporting having been dried up. And yet Bali is an island that actually has, unlike Santorini, abundant water. So there are activist NGOs there that are campaigning heavily to implement water-saving measures, to bring more effort from the tourism industry to monitor the use of water and to make sure that it's being used properly. So this is just a small piece of what my book covers, but it gives you a chance to understand what we're getting at here. It's a different level of sustainability, and I like to talk about it as the new paradigm and what we would like to call net positive outcomes. Because in the end, tourism is going to be, I believe, increasingly subsidized by residents. And that's something that may not be appropriate in the long term for local governments. Even the famous Cancun is actually being subsidized by the Mexican government at the federal level for things like beach restoration and waste treatment and wastewater treatment. As these utilities come under increasing demand, it's very difficult to cover the cost. So how are we going to do that? Well, it's a big question, which is why we have taken this apart or unpacked it, as everyone likes to say nowadays. And we are going to be doing that at the Cornell program that Elizabeth mentioned, which is the new Sustainable Tourism Asset Management Program, which is a small grant program, which is actually actively seeking its first year proposals right now, to ask students, just like yourselves, to look at how businesses can create business models in our field that actually incorporate the cost of doing business, including covering these costs of energy or creating efficiencies. So I look forward to discussing it further.
Donna. And he wanted me to say he's simply in planes, trains, and everything, hotels, which is everything. And another link to our Pacific Northwest crew here in Seattle did great work, Indianapolis and Chicago, and now he's in charge of the world. Small thing. You wanted to talk a bit about the different ways that you picked one aspect from a city and on that built a program, a campaign, and so forth.
Well, good evening, everybody. Nice to be with you. I'm Melissa Cherry's our Chief Marketing Officer sitting over there. And again, all the credit that you get from the year I've been here gets deflected to Melissa, and also Jim McCall, who's a graduate student here at GWTAN. Where are you, Jim? So I just want to thank GWTAN also because you've been I've been in this role now for about a year, and you have been at the forefront of some of the discussions that we've had, whether it's on the education pieces, and that's a whole separate discussion, but I just want to piggyback, and for those of us who are fortunate now to live in Washington, D.C., if you've noticed in the last couple of years, more international visitors here, speaking languages from around the world, I want to let you know it's not by coincidence, and you have one of the finest marketers, visionaries in the industry in Elliott. As a matter of fact, when I left Chicago, I begged him to take my job, but after meeting with Rahm Emanuel, he said, I don't know about that. But nonetheless, when you see these languages, it's because of the efforts that Elliott and his team have made for years now, literally going into these countries and nurturing and talking about the destination. And it's a long, tedious process. And I know sometimes with what we do, it looks a little, it looks like it's fun all the time, but I assure you, when you hit 3 or 4 different countries and you always have to be on, I applaud Elliott and his counterparts for doing that. I can also comment about, it was interesting, I'm dating myself, but I spent a couple of years in Las Vegas with MGM. And it was right at the time, 1999, 2000, when there was beginning to be a clear water shortage taking place there. Colorado River was in all-time drought conditions, and at the same time, you had Bellagio and all these other facilities literally, consuming major amounts of water. So I do applaud Las Vegas because they realized that, guess what? They couldn't grow unless they did something radical. So,
They did. It's in the book. It's a good case.
Which is great. It's a great case study. But I think getting back to my comments is that I have the good fortune to represent Elliott and about 650 other DMOs, CVBs from around the world. And it's a lot of travel. And I think picking up on some of the comments that we chatted earlier about, these are definitely times of uncertainty. Clearly, we've added a little fuel to the fire in terms of the last 90 days, in terms of the travel bans or proposed travel bans. So they've added a whole different set of circumstances and challenges to my counterparts and I around the world. So it is not confined necessarily to the United States, but definitely we're on the forefront of some of the things that we're dealing with. We were actually at a press conference this morning at the National Press Club, and Peter Greenberg from CBS was there, and Peter gives some impressive statistics in terms of issues, in terms of declines. Right now, you may have seen that we're forecasting to be $18 billion less in 2017 in terms of visitation. You're looking at cities like New York City right now that are projected to be down 300,000 visitors. The stories are so anecdotal. I was actually in Canada when that was, it was actually a sad situation was school groups come across the border. And this happened to be a group of 6- and 8-year-old kids on the bus coming in, and they were in their day. And believe it or not, they have to go through customs. And a 6-year-old was detained because he happened to have Canadian and Iranian blood on his passport. And therefore, he went through, and finally the teacher said enough is enough, and they went back, and what that did, that caused the entire Ontario school district, which is of course Toronto and beyond, to stop these school bus trips that literally have been a great source of revenue and a great chance for the cross-pollination of borders. So we're dealing with that as well, and of course our friends in the airlines had their challenges, both United and American recently. So I think there is literally some issues that we're dealing with. In addition to some of the other challenges such as those, we have been using a term called the weaponization of travel. I think we all realize in this room, if you're in this room, you probably have an interest in being able to travel for business or pleasure, and it's part of our DNA, it's part of who we are, and in many cases motivates us to somehow deal with more mundane tasks and the fact we get a chance to do something fun. And the reality is we are in a situation right now that we also have certain political motivation. You may have been following a bill called HB2, House Bill 2 in North Carolina, which has gotten great notoriety for the entire state of North Carolina. It's technically the bathroom bill. Yeah. That has literally cost thousands of people their jobs, $3 billion in revenue to the state of North Carolina, and a countless impact to their image that may take forever to get it back. Why did that happen? It had nothing to do with basically the business per se, but it had to do with some rather aggressive conservative right movements taking place in that area. Carry that through to potentially would take place in the state of Texas. Same bill, more or less, being reviewed right now by the House and Senate in Texas, and they've said upwards that could be $6 billion. So on any given day, our leaders, like Elliott and others, are being challenged to be allowed to run their business. 2 weeks ago, Chattanooga, Tennessee, they wanted to reduce their budget by $2 million. To a city like Chattanooga, it was very important. And it had to do with one commissioner challenging that because he wanted to reappropriate the money for something other. So here's where I think that we, in terms of those of us who have the economic responsibility, And it was summarized in the first meeting I had with Rahm Emanuel. And if you don't know Rahm, he's been a legendary political figure. He came out of the Obama administration. And he said, listen, at the end of the day, I don't really know your business. That's why you're there. But I'm going to judge you really on 3 things. And it really became the mantra because Melissa and I and a team of others were in Chicago for 5 years. And that is, first of all, taxes and revenues, or revenues and taxes. And I'm going to judge you on jobs, both the creation of full-time jobs and temporary jobs. And then I'm going to charge you on the creation of the positive image, or the positive image that comes out of hosting a great convention or somebody coming in and have a great leisure experience. So they wound up being the mantra that we had. And I guess we were talking, there were a couple specific elements in Chicago where I believe that the reason why Elliot's had success, number one, he's a great leader in what he does, but he understands that he needs to engage the civic community, the private community, and the public community. And unless those 3 entities normally get together on the same page, because you're right, then they can address issues like water. Then they can address your issues, because if somehow you only get the private sector and somehow our people together, it becomes a little bit of an imbalance, then you wind up having challenges. And I can actually point to cities and countries right now where they're sort of going through the maturity cycle of understanding you need 3 legs on that chair to be successful. The ones that stood out to me where there was total collaboration in Chicago when we were there was the NFL draft. And that was the result of, number one, the NFL saying, the city of New York actually said, by the way, you can't come back to Radio City Music Hall because we've booked it, so you got to go find a new place. And then it really led to them saying, are they going to change the model? And when they said they're going to change the model, we actually said, well, you know what you ought to do? You ought to come to Chicago, and we ought a combination of an indoor and outdoor event. And I had no idea the NFL draft was this enormous as it is, but it has its own following. And so between the city, the civic community, the education community, because we actually wound up using Columbia College as the venue, and it began this great collaboration. The Parks Department got engaged. And clearly, for those who've been to Chicago, Millennium Park was right there. And it actually took place in Millennium Park. And we were able to bring 100 and some thousand people to an event that traditionally would be in Radio City Music Hall. So we changed the model. Did it a couple of years. So the return on investment was strong for the community, generated hotel rooms, generated restaurants, generated taxes, but it also did $135 million in media, which somehow a city like Chicago could never generate that. And it was positive media. In the 3 days they were there, on the Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, there was not one arrest, not one, of 100 and some thousand people coming to the park. So clearly it worked there. And then so at the same time, the Parks Department also had a covenant in there that if there were any damage to the park, somehow that would be done as well. And to be honest with you, it was limited damage the first year because there was no rain. Second year was a little bit different, but it was the same model. So now you may have seen, for those of you who watched it, it moved to Philadelphia this past weekend. And I know they had probably 150,000 people in that. So the economic impact that will provide for Philadelphia is great. Then the other one that really came together between the civic and the private republic was actually the James Beard Awards, which are taking, for those of you who love food and wine and others, it's actually taking place tonight in Chicago. And it's actually a 5-year program. Again, it was in New York. And they were ready for a change, but again, it engaged. The mayor became obsessed with this. So therefore, any of the city's resources, and why did he do it? Because he's a big believer in having individual chef-owned restaurants that need the support of the city. And he felt as though this would be a great conduit for, not the big chains, certainly they're welcome, but this gave the individual chef-owner restaurants around the country to be recognized. And it just, everything clicked. So it worked on the public, the private, and the civic side, but I believe that, and the reason why Elliot will have a great IPW is because he's done that here. And literally for the first time ever, Washington, D.C. will be on a global stage with 6,000 people, that their entire focus is literally booking the United States, even during these times of uncertainty. And again, what we learned, for those of us who've been around a little bit, we're in a cyclical business. We will get through these challenges. People will continue to travel. They may travel a little bit different. We were talking about this morning, if you're looking for great deals right now, you can find some of the greatest deals on the airlines if you're willing to go probably to parts of the world that maybe have a little bit of stigma attached to them right now. And last but not least, I will tell you, I was coming back. We're having our annual meeting in Montreal in a couple in July. And we'll have about 2,000 people from around the world. And in all these years of traveling, I'd never, ever, ever, no matter, knock on wood, been stopped. Well, I was stopped in Montreal about a month ago coming back. Remember, Montreal, you get pre-cleared with U.S. Customs there. They're not Canadian, they're U.S. And I went to secondary screening, and I had no idea why I was there. And you know, now we sort of found out there's a whole different series of questions that are being asked when you come back into the country now, even if you're U.S. citizens. So I would say it's very uncomfortable, and I'm almost glad it happened to me, because now I have a little bit more empathy when it happens to someone, because you can never take it for granted, and it is a very disconcerting feeling. So when I hear about a person not being able to come into this country because of passport issues or where they were born, and we can tell you some countless stories, but we'll get through it. But these are definitely times of uncertainty, and I'm so thrilled that Washington, D.C. is going to be hosting IPW, so congratulations.
Well, I hope you realize you just heard three very great speakers with great experience. I want to continue the conversation a bit. Starting out, you hit all the perfect points. And the one thing that I want to bring out first, and Don gave me the great segue, civic, private, and public, is that these people have to do it without the sort of structure that most other countries have, that is a Ministry of Tourism. There's not a federal Ministry of Tourism. The states theoretically all have tourism boards, but with money here, money not here, money not here, and money not here, they're getting weaker and weaker. So I've also written a book about tourism called Overlooked, There I Am, where every other chapter I wrote the good part and the not so good part. And the good parts were all ones. The governments had a Ministry of Tourism, you had provincial level, you had local level. And they did measure their water, they measured their electricity with that kind of structure. We used to have one in the United States because of our cyclical politics. And we lost it in 1994-5 with the contract for America when Mr. Newt Gingrich was the Speaker of the House and zeroed out the budget, and that was the end of it, and that was just before the Atlanta Olympics. And these people have been doing it without the national help, and so it's more astounding that they get the civic together, they get the private, that you talk to them and so on and so forth. And also that in the challenges means that you have to wait for the visas. You talked about China, and you know the history. After 9/11, understandably, the Bush administration went, and you saw the border, all the border rules, but you also had, and that's the stuff you don't hear about much, you have a rethinking of visas. So that even if the Chinese wanted to come to Washington, they couldn't get that visa, and this was all over the world. So that diplomats who I know were just felt their hands were tied. So many people wanted to come here and they couldn't for visas, so on and so forth. President Obama changed that because of the Olympic candidacy of Chicago. Right after he became the president, he and his wife went to Denmark and Copenhagen, and they were one of the 4 finalists. And wow, he was so popular then, handsome young president, great wife. Thought it was going to be in the bag, first one out. Chicago was the first one out. They lost to Brazil. And the reason, when the boards were interviewed, it was because they were afraid that foreigners, not all the foreigners would be able to get visas. They might get to the border and be thrown out. This made President Obama understand something. This is a serious industry. You got to take this industry seriously. People have dignity, and we started getting visas. And I hope we continue to get visas. There's been a tightening up, but have you seen any change in it? No. So when you talk, we'll go Don, all 3 of you. So when you talk about it, do you think that some of us are overdoing the lack of the government coordination? If you could revive that office that was zeroed out in '95, what would it look like? What do we need for tourism as an economic development force where you can nurture, sustain, feed, et cetera, et cetera. Gone. Okay, Elliot.
Oh, well, it has actually happened about 6 or 7 years ago with the an act in Congress and the birth of Brand USA.
Right, but that's marketing.
Marketing, right, which from our perspective was also void as a unified country. You know, the thing is when we do international shows, and we'll be in Frankfurt for the conventions, for the meeting side of our industry very soon, and I'd see, you know, all the various cities in the U.S. at the show, which we'll see again. But then you see, to your point, Denmark, or you see Korea, you know, and South Korea, and you kind of looked at that and said, "Gee, I wish we had that type of unity." You know, the U.S. is so different because we're such clearly the enormous size of our country and the development of our country as a whole. And you know, incidentally, you know, I'm very envious of those cities that have state-run tourism organizations because, as you can imagine, being in the District of Columbia, it's us or nothing.
Right.
And you know, we think we're great, but you know, we're very envious of states like California that have tourism boards that spend over $100 million, and then each of the assets in those cities promote themselves, and the convention bureaus are well funded as well. You know, the most envious is Vegas with a budget of over $200 million. My budget's $22 million, which is that will buy you nothing in Vegas, and the assets that we have as a destination cannot promote themselves. The federal government does not give the Smithsonian Institution, the zoo, and all those assets a marketing budget. So it's us. And you know, when you think of who we compete against, they traditionally do have marketing budgets. You know, when you think of Orlando with a budget of $35+ million as a convention bureau, but then think of what Disney is spending, which is well into the hundreds of millions, and Universal and SeaWorld, like it or not.
You get all that free time on CNN.
This thing, and it's a good, you know, I usually will say, just imagine that family of 5, and you're like, okay, do you want to go to Washington, D.C., and go to the monuments and museums and do all that other stuff, or do you want to go to Disney? They don't even say Orlando, do you want to go to Disney? Well, we're not going. And, you know, so therefore, there is that. The fact that Brand USA exists today is a step in the right direction for us as a country in terms of markets.
Are you going to promote you're promoting the convention next?
We'll do whatever we can around the world, but you know, it's a different audience that will be coming in.
Okay.
Because of that. Yeah.
And can Brand USA do anything for you? The website?
You betcha.
Oh, yeah. Focus on your...
Yeah, Brand USA, because Brand USA solely focuses on the international community.
Right.
And everyone coming in, with the exception of our competitors, are the customers are from international destinations.
For the audience, I'll just say that this wonderful country, we were the technological pioneers, internet, the whole thing. We did not have a web presence until 6 years ago.
So 6 years ago.
Can you imagine? Las Vegas had a website as soon as there was a web with, 10 different languages. We did not get, because of this refusal to admit that tourism is an industry that should be part of the government, that tourism does not belong. So it had to be, please give us some money. And you finally have a web, which is lovely, but just if you had that. Go ahead, Don.
I was going to say also, we'll be going to a show called IMEX in a couple of weeks. And IMEX is held in Frankfurt, and it's held in Las Vegas. And as Elliot said, it's amazing. You walk into these, there'll be double-decker, there'll be 2-story buildings constructed in these facilities that will be for countries. And I think about the airlines right now, the disadvantage, right, wrong, or indifferent. The U.S. carriers, for the most part, are publicly traded companies, have shareholders, board members, and when you see a United, American, Delta, and Southwest, the 4 carriers that I guess make up about 85% of lift in the United States, and you see technically them really not even being at the show, or if they are, they're in a little small booth, as compared to Emirates. Emirates will have a 2-story building. they will replicate what a 380 Airbus will look like in there, so you can actually see what the showers are. And I would tell you right now, probably just on the construction of that exhibit alone, it's well over $2 million. So, as Elliot said, we're not playing, and thank goodness Brand USA is funded at least through 2020 to the tune of $120 million. But up until then, literally every destination in this country had to go promote itself. So if you wanted to promote yourself within Germany, guess what? It was Elliot doing his thing without any government assistance whatsoever. And the only thing I'm going to add would be that in any other country, this industry would at least have a cabinet level position on it. And I would say right now, with the absence of a cabinet level position, President Obama became a staunch supporter. Wasn't always that way in the beginning. Made a couple comments you may recall about not taking any government meetings to Las Vegas. You can imagine that went over real big. And then he also talked about some other things. But the good news is he then convened Bill Marriott, and he convened a whole network of people in the industry, including Roger Dow with U.S. Travel, and he began having dialogue to understand the economic impact, the job creation, the image creation, and by the time, and of course with the visa waiver program, he became the staunch supporter of that, as does Open Skies. So, it's not always been that, but I think if we're missing one thing right now in the first 90 days, close to 100 days, would be there's no one really identified yet within our industry who is now having the ear of the president and the cabinet. And we're hopeful that, we had a great leader in Secretary Pritzker. And those of you who know Penny Pritzker when she was Secretary of Commerce, her family is the Pritzker family, therefore one of the small companies they own is Hyatt. She clearly distanced herself from that, but she understood the economic impact, and she was able in a very removed manner to talk about the importance of it. And we had a woman named Kelly Craighead, also part of Commerce, that was there daily, and both of those jobs, well, Commerce has been filled, but certainly not with somebody with the Secretary's background. So we're hopeful that that position will be identified, so that person can come in and hopefully mitigate some of the challenges we're having.
Well, the dark, as a journalist, I read it on the websites, and the dark joke is that the person who's supposed to have the standing up for tourism is the president, who of course makes money in tourism. And, yes, well, people call it less than irony in some of your sector. The other thing that I found traveling around doing my research is that the other thing that happened when you take government out of tourism is that you no longer can go to a U.S. embassy and find out how to travel to the United States, which used to be possible. And it's possible. France has an entire diplomatic corps that is part of their tourism outreach, which is one of the million reasons it's the #1 destination. And it's now forbidden. If you were Portuguese in Lisbon and you went to the U.S. Embassy and you didn't know that the American train system was called Amtrak, and you didn't know that there wasn't trains anybody, if you were trying to make your plan, they would say no, go to the website. And if you didn't speak English and you didn't have a sense of the country, you're out of luck. So they're hobbled, to put it mildly. And that's the other thing that I wonder, if you didn't have a cabinet level, if you would not bring tourism back into the diplomatic, because as you say, it's international. You're looking at your global embassy and you don't have the embassies working for you.
It's gotten a little bit better through the Travel Tourism Advisory Board. Donna, you work on the GTAB with this, and this is something that President Obama really pushed, simply because we were, as you look at moving forward, you have to look at the obstacles that will pull you back.
Right.
So, if I have to stand in line for even an hour, I'm probably not going to. There are a lot of options outside the U.S.
Yeah.
And, the arrogance sometimes of our leadership is that everybody wants to come here. Yes, people are interested and want to come to the U.S., but right now they're making other choices because there are other phenomenal choices, Santorini being one of them, and so many other destinations that are out there. So we had to, the president, the TTAB has existed for a while, but it's under the Department of Commerce. And it was really interesting when I joined about 6 years ago, and there are only about 34, 35 of us from around the country, whereas we focus on making it easier to, whether or not it makes sense to, what can we do to make the process of getting a visa to come to the U.S. from China easier? So that process went from this ridiculously long amount of time and travel to now a faster process because we painstakingly went through the process of dealing with the Department of Transportation, Commerce, Interior, Homeland Security, and Secretary of State, getting all these people together. And government is not always easy to work with, and that's why most DMOs are not part of government for a reason. But then when you think of trying to move things forward, like when you're going to Customs Border Patrol, can they be a little friendlier when they're welcome to America and or do something other than make you feel like you should be grateful that you're at this point. Can you and their reaction to us is that we're not there for that. We're here for security. Like, we want security, but we want the process to be a friendlier process. If I'm spending $10,000, which I'm not, on a flight to come to America, and I have to stand in line for 3.5 hours to get through customs, that's not a welcome to America. Yeah. And what do you think they're going to do? They're going to go back and tweet about this horrible experience. So TTAB was able to deal with these issues, infrastructure issues, and also suggest visa waiver countries. So, when you think of Taiwan now being visa waiver, we were able to meet these secretaries and make these suggestions, which has been very successful up to this point. Now we're waiting to see what will happen with the administration.
And crossing your fingers on the reciprocal question with the EU. Well, I'm sorry, this is too much fun and I'm being too jargony. You all know that DMO is destination management. Destination is the place you're going to, the city, the place, and so on and so forth. Okay, Megan, can you think of a country, we're talking about the role of government, good government, sustainability. Can you think of a good example in your, I will go to my favorites, but what are your favorites? The countries that understand the importance of tourism, that wants the coordination between the local residents, government, and government.
Well, I think, Elizabeth, I'd like to talk about the transition that's happening, I think, in our tourism governance around the world, and the need for transition before I talk about, who's doing it best. Because outside of the developed world where we have resources to, manage tourism, I think, in different ways, we're seeing the growth of tourism in emerging economies that's growing much faster, for example. And many of you probably already know that by 2030, the majority of tourists are going to be going to emerging economies. And though they do have, as you're saying, the federal ministry level, by way of discussing how to get the word out about their countries, what I looked at in my book was the question of what is the allocation of resources in the governance process. So that's a big policy question. And the question really is, for example, in my Greek example, we did have tourists paying for travelers to visit. And that may seem like a small example, but it's meant to be an important and iconic example because we actually got a valid measurement to prove it. But when you look at countries around the world, what we're going to be seeing, I think, more and more is more and more allocation towards bringing more and more tourists to places, and possibly, almost definitely, not enough allocation to protect these places. So that's what really I wanted to at least introduce. If you look at some of our most important monuments, such as Angkor Wat around the world, or any of our, like the Taj Mahal is one of my favorite examples, you're seeing the amount of visitation far exceed their ability to manage it. But when you look at our tax and governance structures for travel and tourism around the world, I'm sure most of you know that a large percentage of the tax actually goes to marketing tourism. So you as a tourist, every time you pay that bed tax, actually, much of that, especially in emerging economies, and we estimate, even OECD estimates about 80% of that goes to marketing. So what I like to say is, outside of any one example, think of a factory where you had that going all the time and you're putting out product after product after product, right? And you put 80% of your budget towards marketing. I always like to ask that as a rhetorical question to my attendees or students. What do you think would happen if that was what a budget was for a factory? Anybody want to answer?
I'll take a stab at it. And you raised some really good points. And it's something that I think Elliot would agree with me. We as an industry have not done as good of a job as we can and we will in providing economic impact data across the board. And we have to consistently get back that for every dollar invested, what was the return on that dollar, whether it's marketing or operational, whatever it may be. So we have been spending a lot of time in this past year in the area of advocacy in terms of giving our CEOs and their teams around the world measurable tools. And we have one called EIC, Event Industry Calculator. And it measures meetings, it measures festivals and events, and it measures sporting events. Because we have to give our CEOs literally something to be able to go to a mayor, or go to a governor, go to their city council and say, for every dollar you've invested, it's X. And we have not done the job that we're in the process of transforming right now. Because it can, in many cases, validate the investment. Or, in the case of Chicago, we were the most underfunded large city probably in the world. And the budget was $14 million, if you can think about that. In an industry that was driving $16 billion in revenue.
Okay, but I've unpacked this very carefully with some of the best economic studies.
I'm sure you have.
there. Yeah, and the fact is that even though you are driving revenue into countries or into the districts of Columbia or wherever it might be, what the municipal authorities are not doing, unfortunately, is figuring out what the cost is per tourist. And now that the economists are after this, and believe me, they're working on it now, they're finding that they're losing money on every tourist. Now, why is that? Because of the tax structure. So, I'm in an interesting place right now to study this. I'm starting a new study with the Harvard Kennedy School on this. I'm working with folks who have never attacked this problem before, which is fun, really fun. And one of my mentors at the Kennedy School, who's an expert in infrastructure and sustainable infrastructure, say for the Caribbean, let's just take their situation. They're in a situation where, in many cases, they're losing money, but they need new renewable energy solutions, like the Dominican Republic. There's a very good World Watch study on this. They're going to have to do $1 billion transition. Now, right now, the tourism industry is not really even at the table for that, and yet they could be, because there could be a win-win where, in fact, ultimately, the Dominican Republic is paying for enormously expensive dirty oil coming out of Venezuela at the moment, and they want to go renewable. So how are we going to, in future, really, take these very difficult challenges on? And it's not just going to be about how we drive per tourist revenue into the country, because every tourist has a major cost, and we're going through a huge global transition now about how we power our world and how we manage it by way of all of these factors, particularly energy, but wastewater. How many of you have been to a place where you sense that your sewage is not being treated? Well, I checked it out. And I can assure you, it's a very high percentage once you leave. So these are things that once we leave the developed economies, we have to look at, well, how can we pay for what the economists call externalities? But actually they're not. They're part of the cost of doing business, and that's going to change how. I've read all these Oxford economic reports, believe me. I know how great they do that job, but they don't do what I'm talking about at all. So,
so that point, it's funny you say that. That we were chatting about some of the Caribbean countries right now that literally have the economic engine of tourism, but if you really look at the true cost, they're now having to subsidize the airlines
they're losing money
in order to sustain operations, because the airlines are saying, it's not enough for me to generate my own revenue based out of here. I want a subsidy, because if not, I'll take the airplane and I'll put it in a higher yield market.
Well, that's because they're not doing the math. And that's what I'm saying. Hey, tourism needs to incorporate in our educational system more about doing the math. Because if you want to break even in a destination in the future, you better start realizing if you're subsidizing it and literally taking it away from your own citizens.
I would, just to speak up for some of these people who are working on this, UNDP has done a lot of great work in the World Bank as well, and I have to speak up for them, because when I was doing my work, I found great studies, especially in the developing world. And the problem you get is that, yes, you're looking for it, and then you run into the corrupt government. And I think of all of the things that those years of research, and I started at Harvard and I had the same problem you had, I had a fellowship, and I said, I'm going to study the travel and tourism industry. I was told it's not an industry. I'm not kidding. It's not an industry. It's not in the original GDP. And I could not find a single economist on the campus, and I was at the Kennedy School, who agreed that it's not an industry.
But it's changing now.
So yes, it's changing, but you go to, whether it's the OECD doing Europe, or it's the World Bank or UNDP, UN, you try to find the figures, you look, and it's the corrupt government that doesn't want you to know, because they're making a lot of money under the table. Right back to the good governments. And I was thinking of the cruise ships when we were doing Caribbean. I thought, that's what you're going to do, because that's one of the most unattractive industries for the Caribbean, and it's filled with corrupt, blah, 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 we won't go into that. I can't tell you, audience, what you have just been witness to. You've had three great minds, great conversation, feeding off of each other, and I want to thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
And I think we have some polling or something, questions.
Just Q&A.
Where are you, Yellen?
Just Q&A.
Oh, Q&A from the audience. Okay.
So if anyone has a question for our panelists, we just ask that you go to the mic. We're going to open the floor for about 7 minutes for the questions.
Jonathan.
Hey, I'm Jonathan Taylor, Destination Stewardship Center, and I'd love to ask you all questions, but to be fair, I'll stick with one of you, and it's for you, Don. Yesterday, for instance, I was giving a talk to a local community about the tourism value of wineries, and beforehand I spoke with one of the lead winemakers, who's also a commercial leader in this particular area, not DC. And we agreed that the local DMO was doing a good job in pointing the right kind of tourism to the right areas of the county, but that they, quote, didn't get the big picture. And this kind of relates to, what does that M in DMO stand for, marketing or management? And I know that DMA has been doing something called Destination Next. And when you talk about the different communities, this seems like a good way of spreading the umbrella beyond the hotel-dominated pattern of DMOs. Could you talk a little more about what direction that may go in, and what you'd like to see happen to integrate the community in the sense that the place is the ultimate tourism product, and it involves all of it?
That's a good segue, because Melissa's here also. Right now is one of the first things we did. We realized that that we were Destination Marketing Association International, and the first thing when I was interviewed for this job, I realized that we necessarily aren't a marketing organization. Our primary purpose is to serve our members as a trade organization. So therefore, we will always market per se, but we're going to market to our members and give them the tools they need. So in doing so, we've changed our name to Destinations International, and we've defined what our core pillars are. But again, everything we do right now has one purpose, and that's to support our members. So to answer your question, I think in some cases we've got great leaders like Elliot at a very macro level and has the experience to be a mentor and a teacher to a lot of our, let's say, smaller. But we realize right now a lot of that falls within the education piece, so it's a perfect segue to what we're doing with GW on some programs right now. Because I think if you look at probably the two of us, we weren't in college and said, by the way, we're going to be running a convention bureau, DMO, one year today. You sort of somehow get to our positions in a unique way. But we sort of found out that a lot of our CEOs right now need tools and resources they've never really gotten from their industry association. So we are much more focused now on deliverables to them. So at the end of the day, they can be a better marketer, or they can do the things that are required now to be more effective in their communities and dealing with political issues. So I don't know, hopefully does that answer your question? Sort of. Well, I'll be happy.
The marketing versus management and brand management and Elliot.
Yeah, and again, that's a good point. Maybe that's a deferral to Elliot. And he's, at the end of the day, he owns his brand. I think the one thing that's very clear to say, because there aren't a master government organization here, so in every one of our destinations, Elliot is responsible really for the brand of the city, and therefore you heard what he does.
And I think that there's no such thing as one size fits all. And your comment, I talked to my counterpart that runs the Sonoma Convention and Visitors Bureau and then the Loudoun County Convention and Visitors Bureau. Sonoma is wine only, Loudoun is wine, whether you like it or not. They're known for their wine and horses and all the other great things in which they have out there. It's really interesting when you're working and dealing with elected officials to get them to truly understand the impact of visitation to your region. With Sonoma, I think nowadays governments get it, but we're having less fun. Like, when I entered this industry 27 years ago, Don and others will tell you that, this was all about the marketing, all about promoting the destination, and government was not that involved. Today, government is right there. They're asking for the ROI. I spent, half the day today in the Wilson building, and Pierre Brown is here. Our return on investment, sorry. They want to know what's happening with the dollars that they're spending. In the wine country, they're thinking, why do we need to promote and invest in Sonoma? Because everyone knows that we're the wine capital of California, not realizing that the global community is also looking at other wine areas of responsibility that have a robust wine industry as well. So it's kind of interesting, what's happening when you're looking at a destination, whereas people are going to Sonoma for the experience that includes wine, plus the now spas and other variables, and how that is tied into attracting new visitors to a destination. In Washington, D.C., for example, people are looking at the number of folks that are on the street, and they're like, well, why do we need to promote D.C.? Because the city's full. And I jokingly, and I say this jokingly because I don't want to upset anyone, but when we think about the 8th graders coming to Washington, D.C., I was one of those people that came when I was living on the West Coast. I had no money. So I did all the free things in Washington, D.C. I ate at Chipotle, I know, because they're in line when I'm at Chipotle, and I love them, but the economic impact is not as great. So a lot of people does not automatically tie into a larger economic impact. So we're looking at it from the standpoint of where these folks are coming from. Our largest component of visitation is domestic. So, Lindsay Hill's in the audience as part of our domestic team from a tourism perspective, and we focus on that. But it's a different sell to the domestic market versus the international market. But as we're looking at growth, 9% of our visitation is international, but they spend 27% from an economic perspective. So clearly, if someone says, why are you investing so much time on the international market? I'm like, do the math. This is why we're doing it. It makes sense from a financial perspective.
Next question, please.
Hi, Tama Protamansa from the Embassy Lecturer and MTA student. This is a question for you, Elliot. Again, I'm really interested in this public-private partnership that local destinations need to have in order to be both competitive and sustainable. Do you think there can be a really long-term partnership where governance with local governance constantly changes and is subject to political agendas?
I'll try to make this simple. Government is tough. I will say, as much as I spend time in the Wilson building and the part of my job that if there was something that I dislike the most, it would be dealing with politicians because they're so different. But I will say that in the U.S. it's a different animal because there's so much oversight, even of the governing process. Whereas when you look at other countries, whereas there are other variables that are uniquely different than what we deal with on a regular basis in the U.S., it's interesting. I'm not answering your question on purpose, but I will say that you really have to. You just have to make sure that you're focusing on getting the right people in office that are going to move the agenda in the right direction. We was talking a few minutes ago about the hotel occupancy tax. I get less than 1%. Government gets 10.05%. So you better believe the Hotel Association, the Restaurant Association, my organization, and a whole bunch of people are wondering what are they doing with the hundreds of millions of dollars that they're getting based on what we're generating from people coming to the city. And that's just hotels. It's not restaurant tax and other taxes that are generated. If you don't have the right government, you gotta, you have to make sure that folks are pushing the agenda in the right direction to make sure that the right people are in place looking out for the best interests of the community.
And, can I just elaborate on that point that you may have been following lately, but on what Ellie just said. Right now there's an initiative within the state of Florida right now to defund Florida state tourism. And right now that does over it does in excess of 180 billion to the overall economy of Florida. It brings in 18.5 billion in taxes. And literally there is a faction within the current political group within the House and the Senate that totally take away 76 million of funding to zero. Now probably at the end of the day there may be a compromise to 25 million with incredibly strong restrictions in terms of how they can spend it, where they can spend it, and the type of calorie you're going to be able to collect. So what's happening, to answer your question, a lot of cities around the country, particularly in California, created what's called tourism improvement districts, TIDs, and really what they do is they protect the fund. They protect the fund how it was intended to be protected, so somehow a overzealous political person can come in and determine they want to spend that off and pull it for special interest project. So,
Interesting. Next question.
Daniel Dozier, current MTA student. A follow-up on that question actually would be, how do you then better engage and ensure that the voters of a district or TID or the city are engaged in that process so that regardless of the political waves and cycles, the support for the DMO remains constant because the population and the residents know how beneficial the industry is to their bottom line as restaurant and hotel owners and small business owners in that city?
I'll answer quickly. You have to focus on the economic impact. And when we look at, Washington, D.C. up until a few years ago, compliment that was given to me by a city council member, and I think it was a compliment, is you're here all the time. I truly understand, who did your job before you? And that's not a slam against the guy that was here before me, but it's me understanding that I have to spend more and more time. When I'm talking to folks locally, we're not talking about all the trips that we go on because they have their vision of what we're doing when we're on these trips. We're talking about the fact that outside of the federal government, which is an obvious economic engine for the city, this industry creates 75,000 jobs. This is the fastest growing industry. It's creating jobs at different levels. Because arguably some economists will say, yeah, but you're creating jobs at a lower pay scale. But I'm like, well, if you have a proportion of the population that is fully skilled, then you now have positions that are being created whereas they can gain some skills and move up. There are a lot of GMs. The guy that runs the U.S. Travel Association started as a lifeguard. So there are a lot of folks that started in this industry in one position and then moved up. So we do focus on the fact that our industry generates $7.5 billion and $700 million in taxes. And then we take it a step further. What does that mean as a resident of Washington? If that goes away, then each resident homeowner of Washington would have to pay an additional $4,800 in taxes for property taxes. If this goes away, these will be the economic impacts. Because of this industry, healthcare, road improvements, and things that are important to the citizens, because it's my responsibility, but it's not my responsibility to get the local community to understand what we're doing. But if I'm smart, and if I really want to move the agenda forward so that when like in Florida, you hear that you're spending an additional $10 million on tourism, the person that feels like a clinic in their ward needs to be built, they're looking at the fact that because of this investment, we're going to create, if you spend $10 million, you should create an economic impact of an additional $30 million to build more than just one clinic. So we really focus on it from an economic perspective and work with the Restaurant Association and all those others that are really focusing on the health of our industry.
Can I just piggyback on that? There is a very progressive mayor Megan Berry in Nashville, Tennessee. And she's an economist by training. And she is, I think, in her 4th year as the mayor of Nashville. If you've been to Nashville lately, the city is literally exploding with new hotels and infrastructure, including a new convention center. And we asked her in our CEO Summit, how did you become such a fan of this industry? And she said, when I began studying the financial results of what took place here, and I began looking at it as an economic engine for the city, allowing her to build schools, allowing her to build roads, and some of the things that somehow they could clearly earmark but it was the revenues were taken and earmarked specifically, and she could report back to the community.
And there's no question, all the studies, that mayor is so critical.
Yeah.
And especially, I mean, you forced yourself to have a seat at the table. In other governments, you wouldn't have to do it. You would have a seat at the table, and that's going back to the cabinet members. So thank you for that question.
Hi everyone, great panel. I'm Talia Salem. I'm an MTA alum, and I also just started my own consulting company called Urban Nomad Consulting. My question is for Megan, shifting gears a little bit. I was really intrigued by the research that you were doing on how tourists maybe use more than their fair share of resources when they're in destination. What happens to that research once it's put out, or the project that you're working on? When you come out with the research, do you intend to cross-pollinate it? Who's the audience? And are there any outcomes that come out of it? So I'm just curious about all your efforts there.
Well, it's in my book as a way of starting the ball rolling, I guess. You know, that's like the ultimate project, right? To get that all together and try and put it in a book, which is the first thing that was done. And then in my two different roles, but in my role at Harvard, what we're doing is actually working on a carbon accounting system for tourism. And why do we choose that? Because it can help through international treaty agreement to use standardized accounting systems that can help local government to actually look at what is the role of tourism in diminishing our carbon emissions. Now, why do we choose carbon? You know, amazingly, through these reporting systems that were already pre-established, they're covering every single issue that I discussed in my book. They're covering wastewater treatment, they're covering solid waste treatment, and of course, they're covering renewable and transition to alternate forms of energy. So we're beginning the process of testing this type of accounting with destinations around the world at Harvard to help them to understand, actually, because there is no accounting of this nature now, how much the local destination is contributing not only to this kind of growing, basically uncontrolled set of resource use, how they can hopefully diminish it through smart city or municipal management, and then through efficiencies and all those things that we know will help. And then ultimately, of course, how can they get green financing? Because if they can show that they're actually diminishing their impacts on resource use through this global Paris Agreement, they will become candidates for the huge funds that have been put together to finance green infrastructure. So we're very engaged in that. We have a lot of financiers and people that associated with green finance as well who are watching this, and we're just promoting that concept that we need to move towards a tourism economy that is efficient, very efficient, and we believe it would be to everyone's benefit.
What advice would you give to Cuba as they're now going to really see a lot of economic boom and need to make a lot of infrastructure changes?
Well, I would really recommend that they do this kind of, I hate to say accounting is the only answer, but when you're trying to grow and you want to see the benefits, and generally the tools that you're given are the economist tools for looking at impacts, which I don't agree with what you're, I 100% agree with all the things you just said about even the benefits to people who don't have skills. It's very true, and women as well can enter into the economy. All those things are good, but what they're not seeing, it's like the shadow side of our industry, which is this resource use side. And even though there have been some studies on it, there is no project in the world that is actually consistently accounting for this. And so we are working, obviously, through UNWTO on this too, because we're trying to foster that kind of consistent accounting, which doesn't exist now. And so obviously for Cuba, we would love to see that they consider that, because that way they would know much more about their rate of return than they know now. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi there.
Last question.
Sure, thanks. This is Dave Sachs. I'm the Chief Eating Officer and Managing Director of Manja DC Food Tours, local cultural food and walking company here in Washington, D.C., our destination, D.C. as well. Megan, I had a question for you and Elliot. So to add on to the previous question, so you're seeing lots of the results and action behind your measurements. more on the global scale versus the local municipality scale, or have you seen those results?
Yeah, I think if I understand your question correctly, tell me if I didn't. What we see is some really great projections at the global level, like Gosling, and if you read him, he's got one article after another about these global resource statistics. But we're finishing a journal article ourselves now, my team, on has this been measured at the municipal or local level, the destination level, however you want to define that. Honestly, there really is very little of that, except through some, we all know there are the satellite measurement program through the UNWTO. We've met with UNWTO about that. I mean, they absolutely agree it's an inconsistent system that cannot be comparable from country to country. And so, yeah, I think that the municipal level, I've looked at it 100 times, they have the most to gain. That's the thing. If they can achieve resource efficiency, it will create much higher well-being for local citizens and prevent some of this have and have not part of our economy as well. Because it's going to provide, for example, solid waste treatment for everybody. What a concept, right? But hey, have you ever been to Siem Reap? I've got some great pictures if anybody wants to see of the solid waste problem there. So these are things that just Thailand needs to take on. You know, these are just big questions that they need to take on.
Thanks, guys. I'd love to read your book, so thank you for that. Elliot, just final question here, I have it written down here. So I understand that you have $22 million appropriated for your organization each year, and you're tasked with to entertain outbound tourism organizations, whether it's other states or other countries visiting DC. Would you agree that part of Destination DC's budget should be appropriated to entice these organizations and partner with attractions funding these experiences that make DC great?
Thanks for your membership. My microphone's not working. No. And we have other members in the audience. I think that what we do is our mission is pretty specific, and it's not just tourism, it's also conventions, and it's economic development. But it doesn't mean along the way we're not concerned about the growth of our community, the impact of visitation to our community, and all those other variables. And we spend a lot of our time working with those organizations that play a larger role in making sure that as we grow, as this industry grows, right now we've got about 21 million visitors that are coming to Washington, D.C. I'd like to see more. New York has 60 million visitors. We will never be able to have 60 million visitors in Washington. We're too small, but there is room for growth. As we continue to grow, what types of services can we offer to members? What ways can we work with the fact that we've got the largest nonprofit community in our backyard, the American Geophysical Union, American Society of Landscape Architects, AIA, the list goes on and on, to bring them into the growth of what's happening in Washington, and also look at this industry and see whether or not there are opportunities to learn lessons along the lines of what Megan is referring to. So it will never be our mission specifically, but it will be a part of our mission to how do we branch and link others together.
Thank you, audience. You've been wonderful, and hope we keep the conversation going.
So my name is Yuri Horowitz, and I just want to express, again, gratitude to our panelists for joining us this evening. It's been an amazing discussion. We're really happy that you can join us and share your wise experience throughout this industry. Just as a quick token of appreciation, we wanted to give you yes, if you want to sit down for a moment, we're now going to move on, shift gears just for a quick moment, and we have a new initiative this second year now to present the Tourism Innovator Award, and I'm going to welcome somebody on stage who was the creator of this tourism program here at GW. At the International Institute of Tourism Studies, he created this great institution that we have here over 40 years ago. Second oldest in the world, oldest in the United States. I would like to welcome John Hawkins onto the stage.
Thank you very much, Yuri. What a wonderful panel. Thank you all so much. We benefited so much from the Washington Destination Development Management Systems over the years. And it's always been a part of our curriculum, whether we're looking at it from the development point of view, infrastructure, political realities, or we're looking at it from the environmental impact that Megan and I worked on very closely over the years. Or, the place concept. Jonathan Turlow made some comments earlier, because, the tourism actually happens in these localized places. And, finally, the economic side is obviously very, very apparent and very important. One of my concerns is we don't really do any measurement, up front. We don't do the baseline measurements. It's very hard to determine what the impact's been if you don't know where you were when you started. Now, our Alumni Association decided that because of this relationship that we've had over the years with local destinations, including the federal establishment and the National Park Service and the many associations, that are here in the Washington area, we ought to celebrate that relationship by identifying those innovators, those executives who are involved in very innovative practices. Taking ideas, testing them, taking them to scale, and then implementing them across the board. So this year they have created this Innovation Award, and I've been asked to announce the winners. By the way, we had a review panel of Yuri Horovich, Jim McCall, who's on your staff, Don, and Yolan John, representing the alumni, and we've also had 3 faculty members, Dr. Hannah Messerly, who is the Eisenhower Professor of Tourism Policy, my old job, and she's a wonderful replacement, believe me. She's going to take that position much further than I was able to do. And Solani Matis, who's our Director of the International Institute of Tourism Studies, and Chris Seek, who is our Executive in Residence. First, I want to recognize several runners. We had many wonderful nominations, but the first is Courtney Kapasian, and Courtney is one of our graduates, and she was recognized for her active work as Director of Marketing at the Arlington Convention and Visitor Services Bureau in encouraging and promoting LGBT travel to Arlington, Virginia. And we also recognized Chris Thompson, CEO of Brand USA, for his leadership with the National Park Adventure film, which received many awards. But the winner is actually 2, and it kind of represents the tenor of the panel. We basically have Beth Erickson, who is the President and CEO of Visit Loudon, and she is sharing the award with her colleague, Kelly Hinkle, who is the Agricultural Development Officer of Loudon Department of Economic Development. And they've been able to do some very interesting things. For example, their ale trail, the craft brewery. Also, the revitalization of their destination restaurant program by bringing producers together with the restaurants and finding ways in which that synergy could optimize the quality of the restaurants. And finally, an artisan trail. So they've done some very, very innovative work. And I'm going to ask Jackie Saunders, who's going to be representing Beth Erickson, and Kelly Hinkle to come forward, and we'd like to present the Innovation Award to them.
Thank you.
Yes. Courtney's taking
I just want to say it's a tremendous honor to be here tonight and to be recognized. When we got the email that we were nominated, I thought that was really great. That was really sweet of Ben Taylor, who's an alumni, to think of us and to think of the work that we're doing, that we're not really thinking about it being innovative. We're thinking about how to really build our destination from the economic development perspective, from the tourism perspective. I think our Ale Trail is a perfect example of how we have this public-private relationship between government and our destination marketing organization. Visit Loudon did a lot of groundwork to develop a craft visitor profile. The Department of Economic Development did a lot of groundwork to change some local regulations so that we could have breweries in more expanded areas of the county. So I think I appreciate being here. We love the work that we do, and it's just really great for the work that we love to be recognized. Be here today, so I'm here the accepting board with Kelly, but our relationship with the Economic Development Department is very close, and we work together in many different ways. Creating the Ale Trail, as well as the restaurant producer marketplace, really is not only a benefit to tourism, but from the economic development side as well. So it's a great partnership, and we look forward to moving forward and doing many more things together.
That's it. So now the most important part of the evening, networking. Thank you all very much for coming.